Hello, happy belated Thanksgiving. It is here almost the end of November in Phoenix, and the weather has been really, really nice. Cooler weather, but still nice and sunny out. So, with this weather, we have had much prettier rose blooms, much greener foliage, and just more to look at in our gardens than obviously we had in the brutal warm summer. So it has been for me really nice to just enjoy the garden this time of year, and I thought I would share with you some of my favorite roses. So these are just roses that I personally have in my garden and that I really, really enjoy. Obviously, there are a lot of different rose varieties out there. Many different types, sizes, shapes, colors, smells. There's almost everything and more under the sun to choose from when picking out a rose. So I just wanted to go over some of the ones in my garden that I have that I really enjoy and why I enjoy some of these particular roses. So I will show you how they're doing right now, and because this is fall, even though the roses do very well here in the Phoenix fall, they look really nice. They do better in spring, and not all of my roses are blooming right now. They do bloom kind of in flushes, and so I'll probably throw in some pictures of roses when I'm trying to talk about them, or just to illustrate a little bit more of what I'm talking about. So I will throw in some photos as well so you can see them kind of when they're blooming and looking really, really nice. I decided to leave out some of my mini roses or like ground cover or vines, and just talk more about my more traditional type roses, which are going to be more like the Floribundas, hybrid teas, and grandifloras. And I did kind of make like 5 categories, and I picked my favorite rose in each category. So the first kind of category I wanted to talk about is like the the best traditional rose. And so when I am thinking of traditional rose, I'm of course thinking of like a red hybrid tea rose. Smells like a rose, just a very traditional rose. So there are 2 that I have had in my yard that would fit this category, but I think that they are also probably some of the more common red roses that you would see growing here in the desert, and that is Oklahoma and Mr. Lincoln. So at first glance, they look very, very similar, and they are. They actually have the same parents, so they're almost the same rose. However, if you put them together in your yard, you would definitely be able to tell the difference. So they're both hybrid teas, and like I said, I have had both in my yard. However, if you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I have never pointed to a Mr. Lincoln, and that is because I killed him when I so I planted him. He looked really nice. He did really well all spring, and it was when I was more starting out with roses, and he just didn't make it through the summer. I did have probably like 6 other roses in my garden at the same time. I did the same thing, same watering schedule, same routine, and the rest of the roses made it, but Mr. Lincoln did not, which I think is interesting because it is supposed to be very heat hardy. After that, I did change my watering schedule to water more frequently in the summers, and I replaced Mr. Lincoln with my Oklahoma. But in that time, I did get to experience it through one set of blooms, and I did notice that it is a very beautiful red rose, and it has a very, very great fragrance. So does my Oklahoma rose. But I think the biggest difference between the 2 rose bushes is actually the color. The Mr. Lincoln was a lot more like a true red, and the Oklahoma rose is like they call it like a black red, but it's just a really, really deep red. So even though I did not have my Mr. Lincoln that long, I am partial to my Oklahoma. I really like that black red color. It makes it look almost velvet, like the petals are almost velvet. And so for me, between the 2, I do like the Oklahoma rose. However, both are a great rose and they are very similar. Here is the Oklahoma as it sits right now in my yard. You can see it is starting to bloom. It's got a ton of buds and some blooms on it. And I do think this rose just looks really, really nice. And you can kind of see here what I was talking about is much more vivid in person, but it kind of looks almost like a black red velvet. And I think it just makes this rose really unique. So as I mentioned, I had a Mr. Lincoln for like one spring, and I do have pictures, so I'm going to try and put in a picture of the Mr. Lincoln next to the Oklahoma so you can see the color difference. I like the Oklahoma color better than the Lincoln. However, if you just want like a true red rose, I think the Lincoln would be better. I also do have an entire video dedicated to my Oklahoma rose. I go in a little bit more detail about it. So you can check that out if you're interested. Okay, so the next kind of category I chose was my favorite color rose in the garden. I really like the color lavender. I think it's very pretty. So I think it's fitting that my favorite colored rose that I have is my lavender rose. It is called Blue Girl, and it is a blue rose, but really in reality it's really a lavender rose. You can see from the photo. So when I saw this rose at the nursery, I bought it bare root, and obviously all you have to judge is the photo, which I am holding. And I saw, you can kind of see even in the photo, the edges don't look as crisp as a lot of other roses would look in like their model photo. and it being such a bizarre color, I was actually really worried that this rose was gonna die immediately. But to my great surprise, it actually lived, and it's actually done quite well. I know that this rose doesn't love the heat, but it does do really well. It makes it through the summer, and once it cools down, it puts on these really pretty lavender blooms, and they have a very good fragrance. And honestly, I think they are also my favorite fragrance bloom in my yard. So Blue Girl is both a striking color that I love and smells the best, in my opinion. It's a very fragrant rose. It smells wonderful. I'm really not good at identifying smells, but the back of the card calls it a fruity fragrance. It's a light, it's just really strong, but a really light fragrance, and I really like it. Okay, this is the Blue Girl today in my backyard. Again, this one's starting to bloom. It's got a bunch of buds and some flowers. And you can see it is definitely a lavender rose, but it looks like the picture. You can see the picture kind of had those fringy edges. This one kind of does too, which I am okay with. You can kind of see it on here. I'm okay with it. I think overall the bloom looks really, really nice. It looks very rose-like, and it's a very, very beautiful soft color, and I always smell this rose. Every time I walk by it, I just will always smell this guy. Okay, and I'll try and put in a picture here of probably when it was blooming more, maybe like in spring or something, where it's got all green foliage and just blooms blooming. Okay, the next category I wanted to talk about is my favorite shape rose. So roses, they come in a lot of different bloom shapes. They range from kind of your traditional looking rose to very multi-layered and frizzy and frilly, and just a lot of different bloom types out there. And for me in my garden, I really like my Falling in Love. I think this one has a really pretty bloom almost every time. It almost looks like the most perfect rose bloom like every time. So for me, this one is my favorite shaped rose. So a big part of the shape of the rose is the number of petals. So for instance, the Oklahoma rose or the Blue Girl rose, that one those have more like 35 to 40 petals. So it makes the bloom fuller. This Falling in Love rose only has about 25 petals, but I think it has just the appropriate amount of petals to open up and keep its shape, like its traditional rose type shape to it. So obviously if you like the more multi-petaled rose shape, you might want to choose something else, but for me I really like that, how it's just this really pretty traditional rose look and how it kind of keeps its shape the whole time it's blooming. Okay, this one is Falling in Love, and unfortunately this one is not blooming right now, but it is getting ready to. I did wanted to show you this one. I had shown on camera like a couple of weeks ago. So all of it looked like this because I needed to fertilize it. So this is how it has looked, and then I did get around. All I did was put mulch and some iron on it, and it did green the leaves up considerably. I put one round of iron. I waited a couple of weeks and then I put one more on it just for good measure. So it is greening up, looking a lot better. So here I am obviously going to have to show some pictures of how these blooms look. I think the blooms just look like very perfect rose blooms, and then I think the color kind of enhances that. In the summer, when it gets hot, these roses turn just white, but when it cools down, when it cools off, and it's a little more favorable here for the roses, it has white and then into this really pretty soft pink. And I think that color combination really enhances the shape of the rose and the look of the rose, and I think it just makes for a really wonderful looking bloom. Okay, so for the next category that I kind of picked is maybe a more important category if you're here in Phoenix, which is the most heat tolerant or desert tolerant roses that I have. So on this one, I am gonna do an honorable mention. I will give my honorable mention to my ketchup and mustard rose. I just planted this one. He is a newer rose, but I can tell right away that he really liked the heat. Right away when I planted it, I planted it in spring. It was starting to warm up, and it really just took to the heat in the environment, and it puts on tons and tons of blooms. I think it does really well here. And if you saw any of my rose videos in the summer, you may have noticed that rose had maybe like a little teeny tiny bloom. Like it tried to keep blooming even in like the heat when other roses kind of stopped, give up. It kept going, and it puts on these really cute tiny blooms. The ketchup and mustard right now isn't really blooming. It was blooming and it looked gorgeous, but it's in between flushes right now. So again, I'm gonna try and find a picture. It really flourished for me. It really put on blooms just all over, and of course you can see, it's gonna repeat bloom. Obviously, it's putting on new growth and looking pretty good. However, if you have seen my videos, I think you'll know that my favorite, or what I think is the most heat or desert tolerant rose that I have, is Doris Day. So Doris Day is this floribunda, this yellow floribunda rose, and it just does really well. It's a very hardy rose, I think, all around. Oh, right. So here's Doris Day, another one who's already bloomed, and you can see has a bunch of buds ready to bloom again here this fall. I will again put in a video where it was blooming, so you can take a look at that. But this rose is, I find, very, very hardy. It likes the heat. It does very well here in the heat. This I have to prune the least. Usually in fall, I have to do a fall pruning to get the roses looking good again, to get a lot of the junk foliage off that grew in the summer and just really didn't look good. This foliage really, it changed a little bit, but not as hardly as much as a lot of the other roses in the garden. So last year I planted a bunch of roses, and with that came a lot of insects. There was a lot of insects that came with all the new roses I planted, and it destroyed, thrips kind of just destroyed a lot of the roses in the yard, and this one was probably the least affected by that. So again, it's just a very hardy rose. So I've also, sometimes I will forget that I'm watering because I do water by hand with the soaker hose. And in the summer it doesn't matter, but in the winter when it does cool down here, you can get a little bit of powdery mildew when you water at night. And so the roses around it, like the drift rose around it or the Oklahoma, will have powdery mildew, and this rose will just be fine. So I just think overall this is a very hardy rose, and it does super well here in the desert. So if you are looking for a rose for the desert, I really do recommend this guy. I also have a whole video just on the Doris Day rose if you want to see a little bit more about her. Okay, and the last category I wanted to kind of talk about with my roses is my most favorite all around or overall rose here in my garden. If my favorite color were yellow, it would probably be Doris Day. Doris Day does very well. However, I am more of like a pink lavender type gal, so for me, my favorite overall rose is Distant Drums. This one is a really, really pretty Floribunda rose. It's got a really unique color. I think all around it does really well in the desert. It's fairly heat resistant, fairly pest resistant. It has a really nice growth pattern, and it smells really good. So I think on its own, it's not my most heat or pest resistant rose, but because it kind of has like a whole package and I really like the color and fragrance, it makes it kind of like my favorite rose to see in the garden when it's blooming. Okay, this one here is my Distant Drums. Again, this is another one that is just starting to bloom again. It's already bloomed maybe once or even twice this fall. And you can see there is a lot of buds ready to bloom and some blooms. So I do like the shape of this rose. I think that it grows really well. So what I'm hoping you can see on camera are the colors of the blooms. So as it blooms, or even with the heat, the higher heat will turn it this lighter color. And as it cools down, and as it starts off, it's this like interesting tan to pink color that I really, really do like. The smell, it has a really, really interesting smell. I think it smells spicy. It's a lighter fragrance, but I think the fragrance is really good. The card, if you read the card, it actually describes it as a frankincense, I believe. It is a floribunda, so it does put on clusters, so it blooms in these clusters of blooms, which I really, really like. And like I said, it does, I think it does well here in the desert. It does very well overall, and I think it just looks and smells very pretty. So probably my favorite overall rose bush here so far that I planted. Okay, these have been some of my favorite roses that I have here in my garden. I know there are tons of roses out there that probably do amazing here in Phoenix. Let me know if you have a favorite rose, or if you have a rose that you think does fairly well here in the desert, let me know. It just so happens that all of the roses I did talk about in this video, I bought bare root from Berridge Nursery. So Berridge Nursery is a local nursery here in Phoenix. It's on Camelback Road, just south of Camelback Mountain. It has tons and tons and tons of roses. So if you are interested in picking up a rose here in the desert, Berridge will start having their bare roots out after Christmas, and then they'll have everything in cans in the spring. So you can go peruse the even more varieties of roses that they have there if you want to think about getting a rose for your garden. And if you did like this video, please do consider subscribing. Thank you.